I want you to think about the last time the market dropped hard, not a little dip, a real drop. The kind where you wake up, check your phone before you even get out of bed, and feel that hollow sensation in your chest. The kind where the news is on every channel and everyone around you seems convinced the world is ending financially. You remember that feeling, that tightness, that urge to do something, anything, just to make it stop. Now I want you to think about what you actually did, because most people, when they feel that feeling, make a decision. And that decision, that one moment of panic dressed up as logic, costs them more than any bad stock pick ever could. Today I want to talk to you about disappearing. Not from your life, not from your responsibilities, but from the noisy ticker, from the headlines, from the notifications, from the group chats full of hot tips and breathless predictions. I want to talk to you about what happens when you step away from all of it for 6 months, and why that single act of voluntary absence might be the most powerful financial move you ever make. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you goes against almost everything the financial media wants you to believe. Let me start with something most people don't want to admit. We are not rational about money, not even close. We think we are. We tell ourselves we are. We build spreadsheets, read articles, follow portfolios, track dividends, and we genuinely believe that all of this activity is making us smarter investors. But here's the painful truth. Most of that activity is not investing. It's anxiety management dressed up as due diligence. Think about how much time you spend consuming financial content in a given week. News articles, YouTube videos, podcasts, Reddit threads. Maybe you check your brokerage account once in the morning and once at night, maybe more. And after all of that consuming, all of that checking, all of that mental energy, are you actually making better decisions? Or are you just more informed about things you cannot control, more aware of risks you cannot predict, and more emotionally reactive to a market that doesn't care about your feelings at all? This is the trap. And almost everyone is in it. The financial media is not in the business of helping you build wealth. It is in the business of keeping your attention. And attention requires stimulation. Stimulation requires urgency. Urgency requires fear or greed or both. So every single day, there is a new story about why the market is about to crash, or why now is the time to buy, or which sector is exploding, or which CEO just made a terrible decision. Every day, without fail. The machine needs feeding. And you, whether you realize it or not, have been feeding it with your time, your peace of mind, and sometimes your money. Here's something I want you to sit with for a moment. The best investment decisions most people ever make are the ones they forget about. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean it literally. Some of the most remarkable investing outcomes in the history of individual portfolios belong to people who bought something solid, put it away, and then life happened. They got busy. They moved. They changed jobs. A relative passed away and left behind a small account that sat untouched for 15 years. And when someone finally looked at it again, the thing had grown into something remarkable, not because of genius, not because of perfect timing, because of absence. There was a study done years ago at Fidelity, and they found that the best performing accounts in their database were owned by people who had either forgotten they had the account or were dead. I am not making that up. The accounts that performed the best were the ones where no one was touching anything, where no one was reacting to earnings reports or Federal Reserve meetings or geopolitical tension in some country most people couldn't find on a map. The market did what the market does over long periods. It grew. And the people who got out of their own way were rewarded for it. Now, why is that? What is it about human behavior that makes not acting more profitable than acting. Let me tell you about a man I'll call Robert. Robart was a high school teacher in Ohio. Careful with money his whole life, modest salary, nothing extravagant. In 1987, he put a chunk of his savings into a broad index fund, not because he was a financial genius, he just didn't know what else to do with it, and a colleague at school had mentioned that buying a little piece of the whole American economy seemed like a reasonable idea. Then the market crashed that October, Black Monday. The Dow fell over 20% in a single day. One day, the worst single-day crash in market history. And Robert, by his own admission, felt sick. He drove home from school that afternoon thinking he had made a catastrophic mistake. He thought about selling everything. He thought about cutting his losses. He didn't, not because he had some deep faith in the market, but because he was too paralyzed to act and wasn't sure how to even execute a trade quickly enough. So he did nothing. He went back to teaching. He graded papers. He coached the junior varsity basketball team. Life continued. He stopped checking the account because looking at it made him feel anxious. So he just stopped. Months went by, then a year, then several. By 1992, his account had not only recovered, it had grown meaningfully beyond where it was before the crash. By the time Robert retired in 2003, that original investment had grown into something that gave him genuine freedom in his retirement years. He didn't do anything clever. He didn't time the bottom. He didn't buy more on the dip. He just disappeared, emotionally at least, and let time and the market do their work. Now compare that to what the average investor was doing during those same years. Selling in October of 1987, missing the recovery, getting back in when it felt safe again, which, of course, meant getting back in at higher prices. Selling again in 1990 during the Gulf War scare. Buying again when confidence returned. Over and over. In and out. Buying high, selling low, and wondering why the math never seemed to work in their favor. The irony is devastating. The more actively people managed their money, the worse their outcomes tended to be. Not because the market was unfair, because they were human. Let me be direct with you about something, because I think you deserve honesty here. The problem is not your brokerage account. The problem is not the stock you bought. The problem is not the market. The problem, and I say this with complete respect, is you. It's me. It's all of us. Because we are wired, deeply and evolutionarily wired, to respond to danger with action. When something threatens us, we move. We fight or we flee. We don't sit still. And in almost every area of life, that instinct serves us beautifully. If your car starts skidding on ice, you respond. If your child is about to touch a hot stove, you move. Immediate action in the face of immediate danger is a survival mechanism that has served our species for hundreds of thousands of years. But the market is not a hot stove. It is a voting machine in the short term and a weighing machine in the long term, and the two things are entirely different. In the short term, it reflects emotion, fear, greed, panic, euphoria. In the long term, it reflects something much more reliable, the collective productive capacity of human enterprise. Businesses finding solutions to problems, people buying goods and services, innovation that makes old inefficiencies disappear. Over long enough periods, that force is as reliable as gravity. But you cannot feel that in the moment. In the moment, all you can feel is the volatility. And volatility triggers your survival instincts. And your survival instincts, magnificent as they are perfectly designed to destroy your investment returns. So what do? How do you fight an instinct that is literally built into your nervous system? You disappear, not physically, not permanently, but mentally, intentionally. You create distance between yourself and the noise. You build structure that protects you from your own worst impulses. I want to give you something practical here, because philosophy without application is just entertainment. Imagine you made a commitment right now, today, that you would not look at your investment accounts for 6 months. Not once. Not even a quick check. You would continue your automatic contributions if you have them set up. You would not add any new individual positions. You would not sell anything. You would simply let the thing run while you redirect your mental energy elsewhere. What would happen? I'll tell you what would happen. The market would go up some days and down some days. There would probably be at least 1 week where some commentator on television declared that we were heading into a recession. There would probably be 1 or 2 mornings where a headline made it feel like everything was fragile and uncertain. And none of it, not a single bit of it, would actually change the long-term trajectory of a well-diversified portfolio held in businesses with real earnings and real value. But you would not know about any of it. You would be living your life, working, spending time with people you love, sleeping better, honestly, because you would not have the cortisol spike that comes from checking red numbers before breakfast. And 6 months from now, you would look at your account and, more likely than not, you would find it in a better place than when you left. Not because you did something clever, because you did nothing clever, because you got out of your own way. Let me tell you about a different kind of story. In 2008, a woman I'll call Patricia had built up a retirement account over 23 years of careful, disciplined saving. She was 57 years old. She had worked in healthcare her whole career, never made a spectacular salary, but she had contributed consistently since her early 30s. By the summer of 2008, her account had grown into something she was genuinely proud of. Then the financial crisis hit. By early 2009, her account had fallen roughly 40%. She was watching the news every night. She was reading every article. She was calling her financial advisor every week. And in February of 2009, she made the decision that she had waited long enough, that she needed to protect what was left. She sold everything and moved into cash. The market bottomed out in March 2009. Within a year, the market had recovered substantially. Within 5 years, it had more than doubled from that bottom. Patricia missed almost all of it because she was in cash, afraid to get back in, waiting for the moment when it felt safe, which is to say, waiting for the moment when prices were high again and fear had given way to confidence. She did not retire when she planned to. She worked 4 additional years, not because the market failed her, because her very human, very understandable response to a terrifying situation cost her more than she could afford to lose. I am not telling you this to be cruel. I am telling you this because Patricia's story is not unusual. It is the most common story in investing. It happens in every major downturn. It happens to smart people, experienced people, people who genuinely believe they are making a rational decision when the fear is at its loudest. Here is what I want you to understand about market downturns, and I want you to really sit with this. A market decline is not a loss unless you sell. Ride that again. Until you sell, what you have is a paper fluctuation. Your ownership stake in those businesses has not changed. The businesses themselves, the ones with real earnings, real assets, real customers, they still exist. They are still operating. The value of what you own has temporarily been repriced by a market full of frightened people, but your actual ownership has not diminished. You still own what you own. When you sell during a panic, you do 2 things simultaneously. You convert a temporary paper loss into a permanent real loss, and you give up your seat at the table for the recovery. Both of those things are devastating. Together, they can set a person's financial trajectory back by a decade. The investors who build generational wealth, and I don't mean the lucky ones, I mean the disciplined ones, they have learned, usually through painful experience, that the single most valuable skill in investing is not stock selection. It is not economic forecasting. It is not finding the next great company before anyone else does. It is the ability to sit still when every instinct in your body is screaming at you to move. That is the skill, and it is extraordinarily rare. Now, I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough, and that is the cost of opportunity. Most people think about risk as the possibility of losing money, and that is a legitimate risk. But there is another risk that is just as real and far less visible. The risk of not being in the market when it moves. The stock market over the last 100 years has delivered remarkable long-term returns, but those returns are not distributed evenly across time. They are clustered. A significant portion of the market's long-term gains happen in a relatively small number of trading days, the best days. Usually the days that follow the worst days. The days when sentiment shifts. The days when fear peaks and starts to recede. And here is the problem. Those best days almost always come when things still feel terrible, when the news is still bad, when the commentators are still grim, when the last thing in the world you want to do is be invested in the market. If you are in cash during those days, if you sold during the panic and haven't gotten back in yet because it still doesn't feel safe, you miss them. And missing even a handful of the market's best days over a long period of time has a catastrophic effect on your final outcome. The math is brutal. This is why the strategy of getting out and getting back in at the right time is so seductive and so destructive. In theory, it sounds reasonable. Protect yourself from the downside, then buy back in at the bottom. In practice, almost no one does it successfully, not consistently, not over decades, because the bottom only looks like the bottom in hindsight. In the moment, it looks like more danger ahead. The only reliable way to capture those best days is to be there for them, which means staying invested through the worst days, which means tolerating the discomfort, which means sometimes doing nothing and doing it on purpose. Let me shift gears slightly because I want to address something that I know a lot of you are feeling right now. You might be thinking, this all sounds fine in theory, but my situation is different. I'm older. I can't afford to just let things ride. Or you're thinking, I have a specific goal, a timeline, a reason why I need to be more active. And some of that is legitimate. Asset allocation changes as your timeline changes. The closer you are to needing the money, the less volatility you should be carrying. That is real and that matters. But that is a conversation about structure, about how your portfolio is built. And that conversation should happen once, maybe once a year, with clear eyes, clear goals, and a willingness to think long term. It should not happen every Monday morning when the market opens in the red. It should not happen every time a pundit on cable news says the word recession. It should not happen in response to fear. Here is a simple truth. If your portfolio is structured appropriately for your age and your timeline and your actual risk tolerance, not the risk tolerance you claim when markets are rising, but the real one, the one that shows up at 3 a.m. when things are falling, then your job, your actual job as an investor, is to protect that structure from your own emotions. That is it. That is the whole job description for most individual investors most of the time. Build a sensible structure. Fund it consistently. Protect it from your impulses. Let time do the heavy lifting. I want to talk about patience. Not as a platitude, not as a motivational poster, as a genuine competitive advantage. In most competitive endeavors, effort and outcome are closely correlated. You practice more, you perform better. You work harder, you produce more. This is not entirely true in investing. In fact, for individual investors, the relationship between effort and outcome can actually be inverse. More activity often produces worse results, not better. This feels wrong. It offends our sense of how the world works. We are conditioned to believe that to get more, we must do more. That success requires constant effort, constant optimization, constant engagement. And so we bring that same energy to our investment accounts. We tinker, we adjust, we respond to every piece of new information with a potential trade. And the market, utterly indifferent to our effort, rewards the patient and punishes the anxious. Patience is genuinely rare in financial markets. Most participants, institutions, hedge funds, individual investors are operating on short time horizons. Quarterly earnings, annual returns, monthly performance reports. The entire infrastructure of modern finance is built around short-term measurement, which means that anyone who can authentically extend their time horizon, anyone who can look at a business and think in terms of decades rather than quarters, has a structural edge that has nothing to do with intelligence or information. Time. That is the edge. Available to almost everyone. Used by almost no one. I want to come back to this idea of disappearing, because I don't want you to misunderstand what I mean. Disappearing does not mean being willfully ignorant. It does not mean never reviewing your portfolio. It does not mean refusing to learn or grow or update your thinking based on new information. There is a version of long-term investing that tips over into complacency, and that is not what I am advocating. What I am advocating is the deliberate management of your own attention and emotional exposure. There is a difference between staying informed and staying stimulated. One serves your long-term goals. The other serves the media companies that profit from your attention. Learning about a business you own, understanding how it earns money, what risks it faces, whether its competitive position is intact, that is useful, valuable work. Checking the price of that business every day and feeling good or bad based on the number you see is not work at all. It is emotional exposure with no productive output, the information you actually need to make good long-term investment decisions is available to you once a year in an annual report. Maybe quarterly if you're genuinely diligent. The rest of it, the daily noise, the analyst upgrades and downgrades, the macroeconomic speculation, the breathless predictions, the rest of it is almost entirely irrelevant to whether your investment thesis is intact. Disappearing means being ruthlessly selective about what information you let in. It means building a few periods of genuine review into your calendar and treating everything in between as noise to be ignored. It means trusting the work you have already done rather than perpetually second-guessing it in response to the market's daily mood. There is something deeper here that I want to name because I think it sits underneath all of this and rarely gets said plainly. Most financial anxiety is not really about money. It is about control. Or more precisely, the illusion of control. When we check our accounts frequently, when we read every article, when we respond to every piece of news with some kind of portfolio adjustment, we feel like we are in control of something that is fundamentally outside our control. And that feeling, that sense of agency, provides momentary relief from the anxiety, even if the action itself is counterproductive. Even if the relief only lasts until the next piece of bad news arrives. This is one of the hardest things to accept about investing. You cannot control the market. You cannot control interest rates. You cannot control geopolitical events or natural disasters or the decisions of central banks or the psychology of millions of other participants. You can control very little. What you can control is your own behavior, your savings rate, your asset allocation, your response, or ideally your non-response to short-term volatility, the fees you pay, the taxes you incur through unnecessary trading, the timeline you give your investments to work. Focusing on what you can control and genuinely releasing attachment to what you cannot is not resignation. It is wisdom. It is the thing that separates investors who build wealth over time from investors who are perpetually frustrated by results that never seem to match their effort. The market does not care how hard you work this week. It does not reward your anxiety. It does not compensate you for the hours you spent reading quarterly reports at midnight. It rewards patience. It rewards structure. It rewards the discipline of showing up consistently and then getting out of the way. So let me bring this home. Let me give you something you can actually hold on to. The 6 months I am asking you to disappear is not a magic formula. It is a thought experiment. It is a way of asking yourself, what would my portfolio look like if I treated it less like a hobby and more like a garden? Gardens need tending, but they also need time. They do not benefit from being dug up every few days to check on the roots. They need consistent watering, appropriate conditions, and then the patience to let life do what life does. Your first shift is this. Stop measuring your portfolio's performance in days or weeks. If your timeline is 10 years or more, and for most people building toward retirement, it should be, then daily or weekly fluctuations are irrelevant, not just unimportant, genuinely irrelevant. Allowing them to influence your behavior is like allowing the weather on any given Tuesday to change your opinion about whether summers are warmer than winters. Your second shift is to get honest about your actual risk tolerance, not your aspirational risk tolerance, not the risk tolerance you have when markets are climbing and you feel invincible. Your real one, the one that shows up when things fall 20%. If that level of volatility causes you to lose sleep, to make emotional decisions, to act in ways you later regret, then you are carrying more risk than you can handle. And the solution is not to consume more financial content so you can talk yourself into tolerating it. The solution is to build a portfolio that is genuinely appropriate for who you are. Your third shift is to build structure that protects you from yourself. Automate your contributions. Set a review schedule once a quarter, once a year, whatever works for you, and commit to not looking outside of that schedule. Remove your brokerage app from your phone's home screen. Make the friction of impulsive action just a little bit higher. These feel like small things. They are not small. The history of investing is littered with fortunes eroded not by bad strategy, but by impulsive execution of good strategy. Your fourth shift, and this is the one that ties all the others together, is to make peace with uncertainty. The future is unknowable. The market is unpredictable in the short term. Things you did not anticipate will happen. Some of them will be frightening. None of that changes the underlying logic of patient, disciplined, long-term investing in the productive capacity of good businesses. The uncertainty is not the exception. It is the environment. Learning to operate calmly within it, to act when your framework calls for action, and to hold still when it does not. That is the whole game. I want to leave you with one final thought. The wealthiest individual investors in history did not get there by being the smartest people in the room. They were not the ones with the best information or the fastest reflexes or the most sophisticated models. They were the ones who understood something simple and were disciplined enough to live by it through decades of noise and fear and temptation. That good businesses held for long periods of time will create more value than the anxiety they produce along the way. That, the market's short-term volatility, is the price of admission for its long-term returns. That the investor's most dangerous enemy is not the bear market, not the recession, not the geopolitical crisis, but the investor's own impulse to do something when doing nothing is exactly right. Disappearing is not giving up. It is not laziness. It is not burying your head in the sand. It is the deliberate choice to trust a process that works over a timeline that matters and to protect that process from the part of you that will always feel the pull to intervene 6 months. Try it, not forever. Just long enough to remember what it feels like to live your life without your portfolio defining your peace of mind. Long enough to see that the market moves without your supervision and does not particularly need your attention. Long enough to come back and look at your account with clear eyes rather than anxious ones. Build something worth building. Fund it with discipline. Then disappear and let the extraordinary, grinding, patient miracle of compounding do what no amount of anxiety ever could. That is the whole secret. It always has been.